Welcome to Podkey Fantasy Football, where the AFC East hype gets a proper stress test. A lot of these takes sound bold until you separate what changed on the field from what changed in the story around the team. That matters in fantasy, because win totals, target projections, and regression warnings all get mashed together even when they don't mean the same thing. The Patriots' number moving from a 14-win Super Bowl season down to a 9.5-win total sounds harsh if you hear it as a verdict on the roster, but the cleaner explanation is schedule math. If last year's path was unusually soft and this year opens with Seattle, Pittsburgh, Jacksonville, and Buffalo, Vegas doesn't need to believe New England got much worse. It only needs to believe wins are harder to bank early. That's an important distinction for fantasy because team wins and player usability don't move in lockstep. A.J. Brown is the clearest example. The confirmed part is simple. He gives them an obvious alpha, and players with that kind of role can beat overall ranking if the offense funnels through them. The harder question is volume. If Brown is ranked 9th overall and the bullish case is WR1 level upside, then you're really betting on New England passing enough and concentrating enough targets to offset any tougher game environment. That case holds up better if you think a more difficult schedule creates more competitive pass-heavy scripts. It weakens if you think the Patriots still want to play slower and protect leads when they can. Romeo Doubs fits off that same gravity. If Brown draws the primary attention and Doubs settles into a WR3 or flex lane, the receiving room can absolutely return value relative to cost. But that only becomes a draft steal ecosystem if the passing game is efficient enough to support a second useful option. Brown commanding usage helps Doubs, but it can also cap him if the total pie stays modest. The backfield is where the incentives really split. Trevon Henderson has the exciting profile and the late-round appeal, but he's still competing with Ramondre Stevenson, who's under contract through 2025 and is expected to open as the starter. So Henderson is the ceiling bet and Stevenson is the roll bet. If Henderson doesn't seize the lead quickly, his ADP can slide hard because rookies lose patience markets fast. Stevenson doesn't have the same upside case, but safer late-round volume is still volume. Buffalo's win total slipping from 11.5 to 10.5 is meaningful, but it doesn't automatically imply fantasy collapse, especially when the offensive structure looks mostly intact. Joe Brady moving up and Pete Carmichael staying on suggests continuity more than reinvention, and continuity is usually underrated when people chase off-season novelty. For Josh Allen and James Cook, that matters because stable usage is often more bankable than theoretical upside from a totally new scheme. DJ Moore is the more complicated bet. The optimistic version is easy to state. New team, familiar coaching tie, path to alpha volume, maybe even an extreme target total if Buffalo really centers him. But the 150-plus catch-type projection is where analysis needs a seatbelt. That's beyond optimism and into an outlier assumption that requires elite health, elite volume, and almost no meaningful target competition. Moore being 29 isn't ancient, but paired with recent underperformance and a mid-round price, it does mean you're paying for a rebound rather than for confirmed current dominance. James Cook's case is sturdier because it rests on work already documented. If he handled 309 carries and 12 rushing scores in 2023 and has receiving value on top, the floor is easier to defend than Moore's breakout story. The trade-off is that running back efficiency can swing year to year, and huge workloads invite durability questions. Still, among Buffalo's skill players, Cook's role seems the least dependent on projection gymnastics. Miami at 4.5 wins is the starkest market reset here, and this one isn't subtle. Losing Tua Tagovailoa, Tyreek Hill, and other major weapons changes both the offense's ceiling and its ability to sustain fantasy volume. When the replacement receiver mix includes unproven names like Jalen Tolbert and Terrace Marshall Jr., the caution on early Dolphins drafting is less panic than basic roster accounting. Malik Willis as a late stash makes more sense as a cheap uncertainty play than as an endorsement of the environment. Mobility can create fantasy points even in shaky offenses, but that doesn't fix a thin pass-catching group. The most interesting Dolphin is Achand because the consistency stat cuts against the broader team gloom. If he really gave you at least 10.5 fantasy points every game and kept ripping off explosive scores, that's a profile manager's chase. The pushback is also obvious. Consistency in one season doesn't immunize a back from offensive decay the next. If Miami creates fewer red zone trips and fewer efficient drives, a high-floor RB1 case gets harder, even if the player himself remains electric. So the cleanest read is that his talent still travels, but his touchdown environment may not. The Jets issue sounds less like a talent debate and more like a design debate. If Frank Reich's offense ranked last in motion rate and also underused play action, the criticism isn't just aesthetic. Motion and play action are two of the easier ways to create space, disguise intent, and generate chunk plays without needing perfect one-on-one wins. So when analysts say the scheme is suppressing big play potential, that argument has a real structural basis. The skepticism around rookie or incoming tight ends like Kenyon Sadiq and Hallmark Cooper follows from that same logic. Even a good player can disappear in an offense that doesn't create leverage or easy answers. Until there's evidence of schematic change, low win and low fantasy expectations are more supported than any talent saves the day narrative. Regression talk gets sloppy fast, so it's worth being precise with Drake May. Leading the league in completion percentage, yards per attempt, and passer rating across his first 2 seasons is real production, and a tougher schedule alone doesn't erase that. What the tougher schedule does is challenge whether those rates were sustainable, especially if last year's opponent's slate was unusually forgiving. The MVP runner-up point matters too, but only in a specific way. If other elite quarterbacks were hurt, then part of May's finish relative to the field may have been driven by league context rather than solely by his own baseline. That's not the same as saying he was fake. It just means a slide toward QB5 territory is easier to defend than a repeat at the very top because the burden of proof is lower. The Josh Allen debate is really about how much you trust correlation. If teams drafting him in the 2nd or 3rd round historically make the fantasy playoffs at a higher rate, that is useful information. It suggests elite quarterback stability can anchor roster outcomes. But it doesn't automatically prove Allen himself is the cause. Better managers may be more likely to structure teams in ways that also happen to include Allen, and strong seasons from him can overlap with broader roster quality. The practical takeaway is still solid. You don't need to reach recklessly, but you also don't have to apologize for paying up for a player with proven elite weekly insulation. If your roster build values safety with ceiling, the aggressive price is defensible. If the room lets him drift, the value case gets even cleaner. One last thing on the hosts pushing the exact 66,800 member Discord number. That figure doesn't prove the analysis is right, but it does tell you something about the rhetorical strategy. Precision signals seriousness, and in fantasy media, sounding measurable is part of how authority gets built. Useful credibility still comes from whether the logic survives contact with context, but the exact number is doing promotional work on purpose. That's the cleanest read on the AFC East cases that deserve more than a headline. Thanks for listening to Podkey Fantasy Football. This episode was generated by Podkey. Create your own at podkey.fm.